Random crits have been a controversial topic ever since TF2's release back in 2007. This video is not about random crits, but rather the weapons that are unable to deal them, most of which are marked with the infamous no random critical hits line in their stats. In my experience, the general consensus on no random crits is that it's an arbitrary penalty Valve slaps onto weapons that they otherwise don't know how to balance. But is this really the case, or does more thought go into which weapons can and can't random crit than we realize? The answer to this question might surprise you, and it can shed some light on how Valve's balancing philosophy as a whole has evolved over the years. Before all of that, though, we need to first go back in time for some context. The year was 2008. The Gold Rush update had just come out, and with it came a new concept that would change TF2 forever: unlockable weapons. Among this first batch of unlocks was the Blutsauger. On release, it had the same perk of gaining health on hit that it does today. But unlike today, its only downside was that it couldn't deal critical hits. And as you might imagine, this meant the Blutsauger was practically a straight upgrade. So yeah, in this instance, Valve thought that no random crits would be sufficient for balancing the weapon, and it clearly wasn't. But hey, this was their first attempt at making new weapons. Surely they'll learn and not make this mistake again, right? Later that same year came leaks from TF2's beta, with new weapon concepts and reworks for existing weapons. In this leak, there were alternative versions of the Blutsauger, with one of those versions having a minus 25% damage penalty in place of the existing no critical hits penalty. Keep this idea of replacing no critical hits with minus 25% damage in mind, because it'll be coming back up later. Anyways, the Blutsauger didn't receive any changes in the actual game until September of 2009, where its no crits penalty was replaced with the minus 2 health drain that it does today. And this turned out to actually balance the weapon, as equip rates for the Blutsauger and stock ended up being about even. So problem solved. Valve realized that no random crits isn't as effective at balancing a weapon as they previously thought, right? Well, not quite, because they'd make the same mistake with the Power Jack just 1 year later, in 2010. The stats that this thing had on release were ridiculous. Plus 25% damage, 75 health restored on kill, and its only downside was, again, no random crits. To Valve's credit, no random crits on a melee weapon is a bit more significant since melee weapons have a much higher crit chance. But just like with the original Blutsauger, it simply wasn't enough to offset the weapon's insane perks. And then, in the Hatless update of April 2011, something really interesting happened. Valve took every melee weapon up to that point with a no random crit penalty and replaced it with a minus 25% damage penalty. This likely wasn't intended to be a nerf to these weapons, seeing as they applied this even to the underwhelming Southern Hospitality. Valve most likely did this to give these weapons a downside on servers that disabled random crits. In any case, this meant that at this point, over 3 years into the game's life, Valve was viewing no random crits and minus 25% damage as equivalent downsides. This sounds pretty ludicrous today. I mean, I think the Liberty Launcher would kill to exchange its damage penalty for no random crits. And even back in 2011, players were quick to complain about this change, leading to Valve quietly reverting it on the very next day. After such an embarrassment, did Valve finally learn their lesson? Well, let's fast forward to today and see for ourselves. Listed here is every weapon that currently cannot roll for a random crit chance. And right off the bat, a lot of these weapons have something in common. These weapons have what are called situational crits. Situational crits are when weapons guarantee a critical hit under specific circumstances, like hitting someone in the head while scoped in with a sniper rifle, or after destroying a building with a diamondback. From a game design perspective, it makes sense why you wouldn't want these types of weapons to also deal random crits. The crits that these weapons grant you are your reward as the player for being able to meet that specific circumstance. If these weapons could also random crit, it would undermine the learning process of using the weapon. Supporting this idea of situational crit weapons not being able to random crit is the Sydney Sleeper. The Sydney Sleeper, on release, did not grant critical hits on headshot, meaning that it was the only one of Sniper's primaries to not grant situational crits. It's for this reason that the Sydney Sleeper was actually able to random crit. Valve added the no random crit penalty just a week later, likely because dying from a headshot from across the map is frustrating enough, let alone a random crit body shot. And that's why even today, the Sydney Sleeper is the only one of Sniper's primary to actually list no random crits within its stats. So there's a clear pattern of weapons with situational crits not being able to deal random crits, and for good reason. The same can be said about weapons with situational mini crits. The Extinguisher, Cowmangler, Cleaner's Carbine, and Backscatter all have situational mini crits and can't random crit. It should be noted that there are some weapons that can deal situational crits and random crits, but of these weapons, most of them either didn't gain their situational crits until after they were released, or their situational crits are so minor or comparatively unlikely that throwing random crits on top doesn't really hurt them. With those weapons out of the way, the next pattern should be a bit easier to spot. All of Demoman's swords also can't random crit. These might as well be lumped in with the weapons with situational crits, since the swords are clearly designed to be paired with the shield, which can grant crits at the end of a charge. Supporting this idea is the fact that the half Satoichi could random crit at first, probably because it could also be equipped by Soldier, who obviously doesn't have a shield. It took Valve until 2015 to realize that only Demonites were seriously using the weapon, and thus added its no random crit penalty. This does raise into question why the Scotsman Skullcutter can random crit, despite having the same increased range and slower weapon switch speeds as the swords. Maybe it's because it doesn't grant an additional benefit on kill like the swords do? Who knows? That leaves us with just 6 outliers. Weapons that have the no random crit penalty, but don't have any situational crits. Let's start with the Southern Hospitality. Engineers are notorious for having extremely high random crit rates with their wrenches, which can allow them to quickly dispatch of spies that are trying to sap their nest. The Southern Hospitality offers a different way of combating spies, causing bleed on hit, which makes spies unable to fully cloak. Valve likely thought that guaranteed bleeding and the chance to random crit would be too strong of a tool against the engineer's supposed counter, and so its random crits were removed. Now you have a choice. Do you want the chance to one-shot spies with a random crit, or would you rather consistently hunt them down with bleed? For the Ullapool Caber, this one should be fairly obvious. Even after its nerf, a crit Caber is still capable of killing multiple people at once. Being able to do that at any time with a random crit would be way too much, especially given how often melees crit. The Enforcer is the one that I'm the least confident about. What makes this case even stranger is the fact that it could random crit on release. The no random crit penalty was only added on a year later, along with 2 other nerfs. The only reason that I can think for this change is that a crit from the Enforcer, with its damage boost active, would be able to one-shot light classes, whereas a crit from the stock revolver would leave a light class with 5 health to spare. Sure, there are countless other weapons that can one-shot you with a crit, but projectiles can be dodged or reflected, and most other hit-scan weapons are susceptible to bullet spread, meaning even a crit from them will do chip damage at longer ranges. The revolvers are unique in that they're hit-scan weapons that can random crit and are perfectly accurate. The short circuit is another weird one, since its primary fire is so unique. My first thought was that it'd be difficult to differentiate the visuals of a non-crit short circuit from a crit one, but then I remembered that the Thompson exists. Honestly, I think the reason why this thing can't deal random crits is because its primary fire is so pathetic that Valve didn't even see the point in letting it random crit, which I think is valid. The Flying Guillotine is an easy one. When it was released in 2012, it had both situational mini-crits and situational crits, so making it unable to deal random crits was a no-brainer. It wasn't until Jungle Inferno in 2017 that the situational mini-crits and crits were removed. So Valve either forgot to allow it to random crit, or they just decided to leave it, as to not mess with the spaghetti code any more than necessary. And last but not least, we have the Dragon's Fury. The reason why this weapon can't random crit is likely due to how random crits are calculated in the first place. The Dragon's Fury is a single-shot weapon, and the random crit chance for single-shot weapons is determined with each individual shot. So, for example, each time I shoot with a shotgun, there's a 2% chance that it'll random crit. But the extremely high potential fire rate of the Dragon's Fury, combined with the fact that it doesn't need to reload, would give it many more opportunities to random crit compared to other single-shot weapons. The other way random crits are determined are with rapid-fire weapons like the minigun. These weapons roll for a random crit chance once every second, and getting random crits results in all shots for the next 2 seconds being criticals. I'd said that this is how the game determines random crits for rapid-fire weapons, but this is also how the shortstop rolls for its random crits. And the shortstop, like the Dragon's Fury, is a single-shot weapon with a higher than average firing rate. But while 2 seconds of crits from the shortstop are a nuisance at most, 2 seconds of crits from the Dragon's Fury would be, well, disastrous. And so, rather than code an entirely new method of rolling for random crits just for the Dragon's Fury, Valve opted to just not give it random crits in the first place and call it a day. And with that, we've just covered every single weapon in the game that can't random crit. And for pretty much every one of those weapons, there's a nuanced reason for why they can't random crit. So this single line of red text has more to it than most people think. Why does it matter? Well, I think this serves as the perfect case study for how Valve's balancing philosophy as a whole has evolved over the years. Did Valve legitimately think no random crits was a significant downside for any weapon during the first few years of TF2's life? Yes. Did Valve struggle to balance the game in general during this time? Also yes. But Valve has improved greatly since those early years, thanks to both experience and feedback from the community. Seriously, look at the weapon rebalances made in Jungle Inferno and Blue Moon, where Valve explicitly requested for opinions from the community, and offered extensive justification for nearly every change. Compare that to an older update like Tough Break, where they just randomly buffed the flog and carried on without another word. Obviously, Valve isn't perfect. They're the ones that put Whatville in the game, after all. But the fact of the matter is that they do put thought into balancing their game, more than some people give them credit for. So I'll be looking forward to seeing how Valve shakes up the game with their next batch of weapon rebalances. Whenever that is.